The first step to turning a bowl is shaping the outside. You can either use a faceplate, which screws onto the piece of wood, and then this mounts onto the lathe, or alternatively you could use one of these, which screws into the piece of wood and then mounts in a chuck, which you can then attach to the lathe to turn the outside of the bowl. We're going to be using one of these. First decide which way you want to have the bowl inside the piece of wood you've got, whether you want to have it this way or whether you want to have it this way. Normally you should shape the bowl in the same orientation as the grain, so if the centre of the tree is here, you should have the grain running around this way and that's the shape of your bowl. It's not good to have the centre of the tree on this side and have the bowl facing away from the centre, because it makes a weak bowl. I've got a depth stop on my drill press, whereas if you don't, you can just do it by eye or put a piece of tape around here at the right depth. So you want to put the drill bit up to the bowl blank and rest the centre on top, and then you want to line them up so they're at the same depth. Put your piece of tape around or lock your depth stop. First you want to mount your chuck to the lathe and tighten the locking nuts on the back with an Allen key. Then I can use my chuck key to lock this into the chuck before locking my lathe and screwing on my bowl blank. So I'm starting off with my 40/40 grind bowl gouge, and I'm going to turn the lathe on at about 1200 RPM to start with. Starting it slow and then turning it up gently. So there we go, we're at 1200 RPM. So now I'm going to hold the back of the tool level with the wood and have my tool tilted about 45 degrees, and I'm just going to take a light cut of about half a centimetre. Tool's jittering around a bit there because it's not perfectly round yet. I can start taking off this corner and shaping the bowl. So rotating the bowl gouge clockwise and anti-clockwise is called opening and closing the flute. So when it's turned anti-clockwise, making sure not to touch the top of the tool on the wood if you're doing a scraping cut, that's a closed flute. Whereas if it's rotated more clockwise, it's an open flute. The open flute will cut faster but get a rougher finish. The closed flute will cut slower and get a better finish. So once I've started knocking the corner off, I can bring my right hand round while I'm making the cut. I'm holding my tool with the flute as close as it'll go. I'm making sure not to touch the top of the tool onto the wood, because then I'll get a catch. Next I'm going to move the tool rest out of the way and slide my tail suck up. I'm using my Axminster speed sizer. I'm just going to push it up there, and I'm going to put my pencil in the hole for the C jaws, which are the jaws that I'm using at the moment. Then I can remove it and slide away my tailstock and line my pencil up to that line. And then I just want to turn the lathe on for 2 seconds and it'll mark a line on the bowl. So now I've got a mark all the way around the bowl that's the exact right size for my chuck to grip to when we flip the bowl around to turn the inside. Now I'm just going to use my skew chisel to get a tenon shaped for the chuck to grip to. So for this bit I've got my shape very close to where I want it. So I'm going to move the tool rest all the way in and raise it a little bit. I'm going to turn the speed up to about 1600, around there. I'm going to do a really light finishing pass and then we can move on to sanding. And there we go, we're ready to move on to sanding now. So first what you want to do is remove the tool rest to get it out of the way. Turning the speed way down to a very slow speed, you can turn the lathe on and start sanding. So if you're just using normal sandpaper, you've got to be careful that it doesn't heat up too much because it will burn your fingers. Whereas with these it's not so bad because it will heat up this instead, but you want to be careful you don't wreck the thing that sticks the Velcro on. So now it's spinning at about 600 RPM. After doing quite a bit of sanding in the reverse, then you want to switch it back into forwards and it'll sand the opposite direction and you'll end up getting a better finish. So I've sanded it with 120 grit and now I'm going to move on to 180. I forgot to mention as well, it's not essential that you do this bit around here because once we've done the inside we're then going to flip the bowl back around to get rid of the tenon and we'll have an opportunity then to clean up this the bottom of this bowl and make it look really nice. So there we go, I've got a very nice surface there and I'm ready to move on to finishing. So first I'm going to use a coat of cellulose sanding sealer to seal the grain and all the open pores on the wood. And this will mean that when the finish goes on it'll look really, really nice. And it'll have an even, consistent, smooth finish. So at this point it's not important to put anything on the base there because it's going to be removed later. So once the sanding sealer is dried, I'm going to use some 400 grit sandpaper to sand it back to get a really nice finish on it and remove any marks from when I wiped it on. It doesn't need a huge amount, just enough to get all of the inconsistencies smoothed out. So I'm going to use some wood wax and I'm just going to get a small amount on my cloth and I'm just going to rub it into the surface without the lathe on for now, just to get an even coat all the way around, roughly even. Then I can turn the lathe on relatively slow and I can smooth it out to get a nice, even, consistent finish. It's already looking really nice. Now what we want to do is we want to wait for this to dry. So it's about 5-10 minutes later, and I'm just going to turn the speed up to about 800, maybe 1000. And I'm going to use the cloth that I used to apply the wax to buff it. You don't want to push too much with this, you just want to lightly do it along the top. You're not trying to heat up the wax here, because if it heats up then it'll melt and it'll go matte again. You just want to lightly rub the cloth along the top to get a really nice shine on it. Once you finish the outside, then what you want to do is you want to lock the spindle in place so the bowl doesn't, also so the chuck doesn't move, and then you can unscrew your bowl and then we can remove the spindle lock and release this from our chuck, and then place the bowl back in the other way using the tenon to attach into the chuck. You want to make sure this is nice and tight against the chuck, because otherwise if it's off at an angle then it won't be round and you'll have different wall thicknesses either side. You just want to double check that you got it nice and centered, and then you want to tighten down the chuck. We can then bring the tool rest back in. Now we want to put it just below the center. I'm going to turn this at about 1000 RPM. And we just want to do a couple of scraping cuts on the face, and then we want to cut in at about a 45-degree angle and do sweeping cuts around. I've got a relief grind on the back of my bowl gouge, meaning that it doesn't hit the inside of the bowl as I'm doing the curve. So we want to start at the centre and just pull the handle round and go inwards. We want to go nice and slow here, and we can go a bit quicker at the edge because this is spinning a lot slower. We can do some cuts the other direction now, going outwards towards the edge. Now we've removed quite a lot of the material here on the inside, we can move the tool rest round so it's closer, and then we can do some more of those big sweeping cuts that go from the rim all the way to the centre. I'm going to switch for a smaller tool rest because my arm is hitting the other side of this one. So now I'm getting closer to the final shape on the inside. So I'm going to start doing the rim here and making it its final thickness, and start going inwards, making it all consistent, because at the moment it's a lot thicker at the bottom than it is at the rim. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to align the back of the tool with the rim and just push slowly that way, doing a very shallow cut of about 1 millimetre or so. And then I'm just going to carry on the inside. So I'm nearly there now, just a little bit more on the bottom. So a lot of people at this point would use a large round nose scraper to go along the inside, but I'm happy with my finish from my bowl gouge, so I'm ready to go straight onto sanding. And I've got an 80 grit pad on there to get rid of the inconsistencies, and I'm going to sand all the way up to 180, and then we can start finishing the inside as well. After I finished the sanding process and sanded it all the way up to 180 grit and got a really nice finish, I want to go back over to my sanding sealer. You want to make sure you get this everywhere, because if you don't and you leave a gap, then when you put the wax on it will soak into that gap and it will change colour and go lighter. Once the sanding sealer has had time to dry, then I can use 400 grit sandpaper just to remove all the inconsistencies. I can then apply some wood wax to the inside and it'll start looking really, really nice. First by hand and then with the lathe turned on, going into slow speed. Now I've finished the inside and most of the outside of the bowl. The next step is to remove the tenon off the bottom. First I'm going to take it out of my chuck and then take the chuck off the lathe. And I'm going to replace it with my other chuck and my button jaws. I can then place my bowl in the jaws and tighten them up. You want to be careful not to tighten them too much here, because if your bowl's quite thin you'll end up snapping or breaking the rim. Once it's nice and secure, you want to bring your tool rest back up. You don't want to turn this too fast even though you're turning the centre, because the outside of the button jaws will be going around extremely fast because they're very far away from the centre. So we'll maybe do about 600 to 800 RPM. So it's at about 700 RPM now, and I'm just going to do very, very light cuts with my bowl gouge to remove the tenon. You want to be careful here not to go through the bottom of the bowl and onto the inside. You also need to keep checking for straightness. I do that by holding my tool up to the bottom of the bowl and I can see what curve the base has got on it, because when your bowl's finished you don't want it rocking on the surface that it's sat on, so you want to make sure it's concave like that. So I'm happy with that now, and I'm going to move on to sanding. I'm going to start with 80 grit, and once again I'm going to work all the way up to 180, and then I can start finishing it. So now I've finished turning my bowl and sanding it, I can then go on to, once again, finishing it with the cellulose sanding sealer and then the wood wax. Now the sanding sealer is dried, I can use some 400 grit sandpaper and then I can go on to using the wood wax. Now the wax is dried, I can use the same cloth that I used to apply to buff it to a really nice shine, and then it's complete. Now we can remove it from the lathe and wipe off any sawdust that it's got on it. And there we go. I hope you've enjoyed this video of making this zebrano bowl. Thanks for watching.